Welcome back to the channel, traveller. After playing a couple more games since my first report, I entered a small 3-game local tournament. Before we commence the battle, a short note. I've decided to take on feedback I received following the previous report to steer away from memes and reaction clips. Although these are the bread and butter of my 40k channel, they just don't sit right here, and in hindsight do perhaps come across as a bit jarring, upsetting the cozy fantasy setting. With that said, let's get on with the report. This first match is versus Dwarfen Mountain Holds and is a 1500-point game of flank attack. Army lists are in the video description should you wish to peruse them. This first picture is actually after Dwarf's turn 1 movement, but it will have to do. I chose my Sphinx as my flank attacker out on the right. My infantry blocks anchor the centre, and my 3 Bowshabti with greatbows stand proudly on the temple, flanked by a scorpion. Across the table, the Dwarfs deploy with their Anvil of Doom at the back centre, Ironbreakers and Thane BSB on the right, great weapon warriors in the centre, and 2 units of Thunderers slightly forward. You've already seen their movement, and the Gyrocopter, which I think might have been their flanking unit, heads straight towards my Tomb Guard. Whether it received a speed boost from the Anvil or not, I can't remember. Shooting sees the cannon take aim at my king, but it only succeeds in smashing a skeleton warrior, and the copter flames 1 Tomb Guard to death. Well, you know what I mean anyway. The Anvil casts an immune to psychology aura as well, I think. It gets this off most turns, so I won't mention it hereafter. My turn 1 movement. The Tomb Guard try to charge the Gyrocopter, but it elects to flee, and they shamble after it. The Necrosphinx flies right up in front of the Thunderers. I'm absolutely kicking myself for deploying my king so far back. I've no idea what I was thinking. He should be much further up the field by now, but he's only able to fly to just past the temple. On the other side of the temple, the scorpion scurries to keep up with him. Here's a nice shot of the Bowshabti in the temple. They let off a trio of deadly arrows, slaying a thunderer or 2. The catapult targets the dwarf warriors, but misses. Dwarfs turn 2. The Gyrocopter must have got a bit of a fright from the Tomb Guard earlier, as it fails to rally and continues fleeing past the Thunderers. On the other flank, the other Thunderers form into 2 ranks, and the Ironbreakers come forward to back them up. The dwarf warriors here start making their way around the left of these ruins a bit, although I neglected to grab a photo of it. Shooting sees the cannon have better luck than last turn, and put 2 wounds onto my king. The Sphinx takes a wound from the Thunderers, and I also lose a few skeleton warriors, either to a spell from the Anvil or the left-hand Thunderers, or perhaps both. My turn 2. The priest heals a wound on my king, which is nice. Due to his awful deployment, the king's too far away for a charge this turn, but he flies to a commanding position, ready to swoop down in turn 3. The Sphinx crashes into the Thunderers and loses a wound to Overwatch. Shooting amounts to little or nothing, and nor do I have any useful spells at the moment. Oh, I should have mentioned that my spells are Cursed Blades and Earthen Ramparts. In combat, the Sphinx slays a few of the Thunderers and suffers no wounds in return, but the sturdy Dwarfen warriors just give ground, with the colossal construct following up. Dwarfs turn 3. The Gyrocopter rallies, and the Ironbreakers surge into this position, buoyed by a magical boost of speed from the Anvil perhaps. The cannon and Thunderers try in vain to put some more wounds onto my king, but this time his defences prove too tough. On the left flank, the Sphinx overcomes the Thunderers at last, and ends up in this rather scary position to the flank of the warrior block. Tomb Kings turn 3. The Dwarfen Thane yells out insults and taunts to my king, attempting to goad him into a frontal charge into the Ironbreakers. But fortunately for the Thane, the king isn't versed in the dwarfish tongue, and he opts for a sneakier charge into the Thunderers instead, hoping to blow right past them and out of the way of the Ironbreakers. The Sphinx has tasted blood, and although it may be overmatched, I decide to plough it into the flank of the warriors. It's just too tempting not to. Although the Anvil of Doom might have looked fairly close, measurement is to the small base in the centre of the model, so it was a bit far. My infantry trudges forwards, and I manage to heal back some of the slain skeletons. I think by this point my Scorpion has been slain, potentially by a spell from the Anvil last turn. Combat over here sees 7 of the warriors slain, with the Sphinx taking 1 wound in return. They give ground and end up in this position. In hindsight, I'm pretty sure they shouldn't have been allowed to turn and face the Sphinx, but I didn't catch it at the time. The mighty king makes short work of the Thunderers, killing most of them, running the survivors down, and ending up over here, to the side of the Ironbreakers. Dwarfs turn 4. The Gyrocopter moves all the way down here, with a magical boost from the Anvil, I think, and flames my Lich Priest, doing a wound. The Ironbreakers simply turn round and glare at the king. The king takes another wound in shooting, either from the cannon or the Anvil, leaving him on 7. Combat continues to go well for the Sphinx, with 6 more dwarfs felled and only 1 wound lost. The dwarfs are driven back, and I elect not to follow up, so I can charge again next turn. In my turn 4, my priest isn't able to get anywhere where the copter won't be able to charge him next turn, so the Bowshabti change their facing in a desperate attempt to bring the dwarfen contraption down. Only 2 can see it, though, and they don't manage to do any wounds. Still reluctant to engage a large block of infantry, the king instead swoops down on the cannon, shattering it with ease, and then turns round to face the Ironbreakers. The Sphinx slays the last of the warriors, although they manage to bring it down to its last wound, and it ends up just behind the Ironbreakers here. Turn 5 for the dwarfs, and the Ironbreakers finally manage to catch up to the dragon. The Gyrocopter charges and slays the Lich Priest. My army starts to crumble, although I roll pretty well overall, and in total only lose 1 Tomb Guard this turn. Heartened by the Copter's daring assault behind enemy lines, the Runesmith on the Anvil summons a mighty blast of energy and obliterates the hated Sphinx. Ah well, it had a good run, and it definitely exceeded my expectations this match. This picture's after combat too, which ends with 3 Ironbreakers dead. The Anvil cast a spell on them to re-roll failed armour saves, which made them astonishingly resilient, even against the dragon. They don't do any wounds in return, but win combat due to their static combat res, and push the king backwards. My turn 5. The Bowshabti shuffle across so they can all see the Gyrocopter, and avenge the death of their hierophant by skewering the copter with a pinpoint volley, destroying it and sending it clattering into the shifting sands. I don't bother moving my infantry much as I thought this would be the last turn. Only later, I realized we'd play for 6 turns, so moving up a bit more would have been prudent. Here's how combat ends up, and it causes me much anguish. Allow me to explain. The king only manages to kill 3 more Ironbreakers. I can't quite remember the details of how exactly it panned out, but I guess he must have also taken some wounds, because he loses combat again, and actually only has 4 wounds left now. So he has to give ground and hits the table edge. We weren't sure what happens in this scenario, and after checking the rulebook ourselves and seeing no answer, we called an adjudicator over. After some discussion, it was ruled that as the unit isn't fleeing, it stops when it hits the table edge. So that's how we played it. However, I've subsequently seen it written in the FAQ that units that give ground off the table edge are destroyed. Let's be clear, it doesn't say this in the rulebook, and if you search for the words "give ground" in the FAQ, it doesn't bring up that answer. I only found it written there on a random perusing of the document. Of course, mistakes will always be made, especially as we're far from 100% au fait with the rules as of yet. But it does pain and frustrate me that the unyielding Ironbreakers should have won a heroic victory over the dragon here, only for that not to happen. Dwarfs turn 6 plays out with a continued stalemate between these 2 units, and in my turn 6, I finally managed to charge my ambushing Scorpion into the Ironbreakers. having only brought it on in the previous turn. This backfires, though, as they get lucky and slay it. 2 Ironbreakers die to the dragon, as they manage to get a 2+ rerollable armor save, thanks to a super version of the Anvil's spell. The resultant combat res is enough to crumble the Tomb King slightly, but he still survives with 2 wounds remaining. So, when the dust settles, so to speak, it goes down as a Tomb King victory, 874 to 535. Something of a Schrodinger's victory, then. If the Tomb King had been destroyed, that would have been enough to carry the dwarfs to a victory, so I can concede defeat in that respect. I only lament that the dwarfs were denied a rightful victory on the day. If I'd known that being pushed to the edge of the board could instantly destroy the Lord, however, I'd probably not have allowed him to face the Ironbreakers so close to the edge, and would have ignored the cannon, either backing up or charging the block instead. But we're getting a bit academic now, so let's stop rambling and instead note a few more things about the battle. As I previously noted, I think deploying my king so far back was a terrible mistake, but it was compounded by sending him off in the direction of the Ironbreakers in the first place. He had no need or business going anywhere near that block, and would probably have been much better off sticking to the right flank with the Sphinx. My catapult did essentially nothing all game, and nor did my magic, which is why I barely mentioned either one. I got quite lucky with my crumble rolls in the last few turns, and barely lost any models at all to it. Dwarfs seemed interesting, with Anvil-backed Ironbreakers turning out to be astonishingly resilient, but I was relieved to not be facing more artillery. All in all, an interesting first match, and thanks to a great opponent. That will suffice for the report, I think, so I'll hopefully see you next time for the second game's report.